Good morning. You're listening to WXOX 97.1 in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is Artist Talk with LVA, the show produced by Louisville Visual Art. I'm your host, Keith Waits. Today, I've got a team of people here. A previous guest on the show, Bob Lockhart, is an award-winning sculptor. I'm already off to a bad start. Whose work is in the permanent collections of the Whitney Museum of Art in New York, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, the Indianapolis Art Museum, and many others. In addition, Lockhart's pieces have been commissioned by the Louisville Zoo, by numerous churches and schools, and by private collectors. He has brought with him today two friends, and we'll talk about the word friends here in a minute. Cedric Ballarati was educated in architecture at Belgium Liège University and in photography at La Belgium Liège Art Academy. I'm probably not saying that exactly right. His works have been exhibited in group and solo shows from 2007, and his first photographic book, Tierra Techen, well, I'll ask him to pronounce that correctly in a second, was released in 2019. He is currently living and working in Louisville, Kentucky for about the past year or so. And then also with us today is Lynn Duke. And Lynn is a ceramic artist originally born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. She was a surgical nurse and then I think retired. We'll clarify that. But about 10 years ago, started studying clay with Laura Ross, the very eminent Laura Ross, one of the top clay artists in the area, and is now a ceramic artist working out of the studios at AA Clay Studios, Alex Adams' really terrific space down on 4th Street and down there near Churchill Downs, down there in that southern part of town. So the reason they have all come together today is that Bob Lockhart, a longtime member of Pyro Gallery, is showing, and as is the tradition at Pyro, he has invited some friends to come show with him. He's calling the show Friends. Very straightforward. Lynn Duke and Cedric are two of those people. Amber Thieneman is another of those people who unfortunately could not join us today. But the exhibit opens on April 1st, runs through May 1st, and there will be a reception on April 3rd from 1 to 4 p.m. at Pyro, which is 1006 East Washington Street. So let's get into it here. So Bob, you and I have talked before. You're a preeminent sculptor, drawing. I mean, I feel like from what I can see on the card, your work in here is going to be some of your drawings. And we'll talk about the work a little bit, but I'd read some introduction, but I want you to talk about how you came to invite these three people, how you came to know them, and what you know about their work, and why you were struck with the idea of inviting them to exhibit with you.
Well, it's very easy. 10 years ago, approximately, I realized that I had had my wonderful day in the sun, and I wanted other people to experience that. And so typically when a young artist or an artist comes to any gallery, they say, well, where have you shown? And give us some of your experiences. Well, many times that doesn't exist. They haven't shown anywhere, not by any fault of their own, but because of this game. So for the last 10 years, I've invited people to be a part of my show and, if you will, use my name to bring people to experience the wonderful art of these others. So I have selected these three very proudly to exhibit with me.
How did you get to know these three people?
Well, Cedric was circumdicious. He met my niece's husband in the park, and they then said, "You've got to meet this man." And then I was privileged to meet him, and then we have carried on some relationship. And I found out that we could do this. And Lynn, I have seen her work at Edenside and been charmed by her work and her sense of humor and her ability as a ceramist with color, etc. And it's just a fantastic artist. And then Amber was a student at Bellarmine. She also went to me with me to Guatemala, and she was a music major and an art major. And she has an incredible voice. I mean, oh my God, that would be something to spotlight right away. Just a wonderful voice, and she has an ability with lines. She especially is in the use of line as a statement, as a signature. She is excellent, and that's just one of the many things she does. So that's how this happened.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on to Cedric here. Now, Cedric, it looks like you had accomplished quite a bit in Europe and Belgium in particularly. And so let's start with, how did you come to be here? What brought you to Louisville, Kentucky?
Well, a woman, of course, my wife. My wife is American, and she got a job last year with UPS,
Mm.
and so it was the main reason we moved from the Netherlands, actually, Maastricht in the Netherlands, to Louisville. And so I'm enjoying my stay here. It's always interesting to discover a new place, a new culture, new environment, and meet new artists. Um, so yeah, I like it a lot.
And you are a photographer.
I do
And
photography mostly. Yeah.
yeah, is that your primary medium, or do you do other things?
Well, I do mostly photography, and I began a few years ago to write. And so, in some photography books, or some photography works, I'm including now text. But maybe I talk to you a little bit later about the book that you pronounced very well, Terre de Chien, that is also translated in English, and so it would be World of Dogs.
Oh, okay. Well, my approach to pronouncing other languages is to try to just go with your first instinct and then say it fast. And you
Fantastic.
usually get by.
Yeah.
When you slow down and try to speak it phonetically, that's when you really sound bad. So, okay, and so Lynn, I don't want to skip everybody. We'll all come back around to everybody's work,
Sure.
but Lynn, so talk about. Am I right that you retired from nursing and that's
Yes,
when
I'm
you started
retired.
talking about? That's when you started really getting into doing ceramics.
Well,
Oh,
yeah, uh, yeah, after I retired, uh, I really had more time to do it.
right.
So, when I was taking classes with Laura, I got addicted to clay. And, and it was, it kind of fills an inner need to play. And so I just started playing, and then I came up with figures, and it makes me feel good. It relaxes me, and I like to do fun things.
Well, you're in a good tradition of artists. There's a lot of artists who really got started once they retired, and I think that they had art probably had an itch. But again, like you say, it takes time to really devote yourself to it. And of course, in this town, the great example of that is Elmer Lucille Allen, who I always say, when she retired was when she decided to get busy, and so hats off to you. I'm curious to ask this question though before I lose track of it. Do you see any sort of relationship in your career as a surgical nurse and the ceramics work? Is there any relationship, or is it something entirely different? Was that what was appealing?
Well, uh, in nursing, there's not a lot of room for creativity, and everything is very exacting,
Hmm.
which is as it should be. Uh, but I've always had a rebellious streak. So when I quit nursing, I had this need to rebel against straight lines and rules. And so I don't know how it came to me to do this. I think the clay just talks to me, and
Hmm.
I sit down and I think, well, I'm going to do a face. And so I start doing it, and I kind of get in a zone, and it kind of creates itself.
Right.
So, and I enjoy that because it's very relaxing. It makes me feel good when I make something that I think is really fun. Uh, it's just, I guess it's a need that I've always had to do something different.
Well, and you're talking about a relationship with the medium, which is a very important discussion with almost every artist I've ever talked with. That what medium speaks to you or calls to you, or that relationship is always very, very important. And that's what you're touching on too.
Yes. Yes. I always wanted to be a potter. And then I found Laura Ross, and all she had available was a hand building class. And I just, the first time I was there and I started playing with the clay, I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. But I don't really like to do the wheel, the pottery wheel. I like to just make people or animals or vases. I just like to play. And I like a lot of color and a lot of texture. And it just, color just, it makes my heart smile.
Well, and that makes sense to me because the wheel has a certain sort of discipline to it, and you were trying to get away from discipline, right? The
Yes.
discipline of I don't know what it's like to be a surgical nurse, but I imagine that's a lot of discipline and attention to detail. You can't make a mistake. Whereas with clay, you can make a mistake and just like redo it, and just like you're playing with a very malleable medium, and you can just
You can
play.
just squash it.
Yeah, you can just squash it. Bob, let's come back around to you because that, of course, what she's talking about, of course, makes me think about your clay work. Talking about playful and forms, and she loves animals. Did you did you look at Lynn and feel like an affinity maybe between the two of you as artists?
Oh, there's no doubt, but she's more charming than my stuff. I mean, there's no doubt. When I went to the Edenside Gallery and I said, "Who is this?" and I was told, and I did nothing with it except I just enjoyed the work. But then I had the opportunity of choosing somebody for the show, and I thought, this is the lady that I want for this show. So yeah.
Well, do you find that to be the case with either Cedric or Amber? That are you feeling an affinity with these people? Like, because obviously, when I look at Cedric's work, I was looking at his website. I would think, oh, this is a very different. There is a lot of color to Cedric's website, but in his imagery. But do you feel an affinity, or do you sometimes find that you're fascinated by a contrast?
Yes, the affinity is not exactly what you stated. The affinity is that I am always looking for somebody who is dedicated to an idea, whatever it is, whatever media it is. You can kind of tell where there's a drive and there's a need and there is a compulsion to do it. And then the compulsion is enhanced by the quality of the work. So, yes.
And is it true what we're going to see from you in this exhibit will be, is it drawings or are there some clay work?
No, I wouldn't dare to compete with Lynn. So it will be all 22 by 30 drawings, which is my new, thank the Lord, way of expressing myself. Since the rocks got so much harder when I bought them, I think they just started me sending me harder rocks. And so the clay is a medium that I'm very, very comfortable with, or the drawings are what I'm very comfortable with. And it's actually what my degree is in from the Art Institute. I abandoned it probably because I was so fascinated by Barney Bright, but so I've gone back to it. I missed teaching tremendously. So the drawing has been a fulfillment of many things for me.
Right. We didn't say it in your biography, but you taught for 40 plus years.
7 years, yeah.
7 years, mostly at Bellarmine, where, as you said Amber was a student of yours. And I believe previously when you've invited students, like you're always very in touch with the people who had been previous students, it seems like.
I'm very privileged to know them.
Yeah. Cedric, let's switch back over to you. So again, I was looking, as I mentioned, I was looking at your website and looking at the images because you're new to me because you've only been here for, was it a year? Was that correct?
Yeah, a little bit more than 1 year.
A little bit, yeah. So you're a photographer, and I know a lot of photographers can do all sorts of different things, but the images that I was looking at, which I think might be the newer images, in fact, I have it right here in front of me, so I have a reference to it. And if anybody else is interested, we should mention everybody's website at some point here. But it is Cedric Ballarati.com, and I'll spell it Cedric, Cedrcic, Ballarati, Ballarati. Although technology doesn't require you just got to get close to it. There's a lot of outdoor shots and a lot of you've done things where you've it seems like you've pushed the contrast and heightened color. Talk a little bit about what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve with these images.
Yeah. So the series I will show in Pyro with Bob and Lynn and Amber is named Enjoy, and I'm very happy Lynn mentioned the playing and the pleasure just to play, because this is essential, and that series Enjoy aims just to have something positive in front of you, using vibrant color, a negative space, a certain construction with movement. So it's mostly street photography, but I guess on a creative way. So it's not just getting what you see, but creating something a little bit new, mostly with the color and the movement. And also for me, it's very interesting. So I began, 20 years ago with black and white, like most photographer in analog film and print in the lab. Mm-hmm. And when you do black and white, you create something that is not the truth, it's not the reality, just because it's black and white. So you will focus on proportion and lines and maybe some graphic aspect. But then you go with colors, and you can decide if you want to do something very documentary style or something more creative. And this is my path, is to say, I don't want just to get what I see, but to make something, even if it's not a computer composition, it's not out of nothing, but it's a little bit more than the reality.
Right, and it's interesting when you talk about, because it's a kind of a cliche, it's an old canard, but I think it's true that black and white photography, for some reason, is often seen as being more realistic, more gritty, even though it is taking the color out of it. And then looking at your work, which could argue, you could argue, at least in this Enjoy series, what I'm looking on your website, it's more realistic because immediately the color makes you think we're seeing it more like what we're seeing it, except you've then pushed it into some other place that's more subjective. So now it starts to be, I don't know what I would say, if it's, I guess, expressionistic because of the way you've pushed the color and contrast, but so it's an interesting, photography is always an interesting play on reality versus illusion, it seems to me, just in the medium inherently. Is that right? Resonate with you?
It's perfectly correct, and there is a very important other element for me, is the way you take the picture. So as you can see, most of the time they are long exposure pictures. So it means that you have to wait at the right place at the right time. So what does it mean, the right time? It means that you're waiting for a yellow bus, because that will bring something nice in your blue composition. You're waiting for a bicycle because the wheels will bring something interesting with pedestrian or whatever. So for me, the act of taking the picture is as important as the result, because it's kind of a dedication in time, in energy, in going out of your house to find and to make the picture. So I love that, and it's also a game for me, for sure. It's also it's playful.
So now we've found this relationship, and you might not, I mean, we might have looked at Cedric and Lynn and thought they're so different, they're so far apart, the mediums, it's two-dimensional, three-dimensional, but there's the thread, right? The playfulness. And I would say that's in Bob's work too. Is there playfulness in Amber's work? Bob,
I don't know if playfulness would be the account, but she's usually a very generally happy person. And so I have to assume that there is this thread. She is an incredible voice. She is off with her husband and his band right now. And I am ashamed to say at the moment, I don't remember the name, but I don't remember a lot of things now. But she is with that group and using that particular talent that she has. But I've watched her work grow and became interested initially because I had her as a student and knew her from Guatemala. And I watched her making jewelry. And then the jewelry expanded into other things. She was making jewelry using natural elements from nature. And then she began, at least that I could see, this drawing. And she began drawing in a way that was very basic. I mean, the lines could be considered a elementary exercise from beginning drawing, but she took it somewhere else. And then she began to enhance it by the surfaces that she put it on. And yeah, now that I'm looking at this picture, I would say there is a playfulness to it. Perhaps that is the thread. Again, what I have noted to my satisfaction is the other thread is the need to do and the willingness to try. And again, I think in my work, I have to set a series of questions about, and if I ran out of questions, then I've run out of any need to do art. So I think all of the artists continue in a way that they're posing questions to themselves and they're answering to themselves or coming up with solutions. And solutions generally require other options that you come about and you think, well, I've got to try this. Unless I write it down, I don't remember what I wanted to try. But in this case, I think the thread is the need to be creative, and then the level of creativity that comes about. So, yeah, Amber is a jewel among many jewels because she has two talents, if you will. But yeah.
Well, I think I have found over my years of doing this that it's not unusual for artists to have more than one creative outlet.
Right.
They tend to get a focus on one, and we talk about one. And depending on the environment, this show we talked to visual artists, but so maybe I'll find a reason to have Amber on later that I can highlight both.
That would be wonderful. I mean, Rodney Hatfield is a wonderful example of that. His ability with his music is equal to his ability with his arts. So yes.
Well, Lynn, I want to come back around to you because when you talk about that playfulness, the other thing, and again, I have not actually seen the work you will have in this show, but the imagery I've seen that makes me think about masks, that some of them look like they're mask work. And I know they're ceramics, so I doubt anybody's going to strap one to their face. But are you thinking about that kind of thing when you do it, like the mask work, or are you just sort of responding to? Tell me what's going to happen. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
There we go.
There we go. A lot of the times I just sit down and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I'll just sit there and mash on the clay. And then I just think, well, I'd like to do a kitty cat. And so I'll sit down and make my version of a kitty cat. And my stuff is very, very far from perfect. And it's got a lot of texture. And I don't want it to look perfect. I want it to look like a second grader did it. And it just, I don't know how to say it. It just comes out.
Well, you're working very instinctually then.
Yeah. I know Alex, sometimes he sits there and watches me. He says, how do you do that? And I don't know how I do it. It just if I think, all right, maybe it needs to have another leg and it'll have 5 legs instead of 4. Or maybe it doesn't need arms, it just needs hands. And I just like for it to look like fun.
Well, you know, like Bob, it sounds like you're creating your own bestiary, right? These
Well,
these
yeah.
creatures only exist from your hand and in your world.
Yeah, because it is a little, I do have a little community there, and
Sure.
they just kind of talk to me, and I think it's a different way of expressing myself that I never had the opportunity to express myself before in this way. And there's nobody that's going to criticize me. There's nobody's going to say, oh, I don't like that, or oh, why don't you do that? And then I go to the studio. I usually make things at home and take it to the studio to have it fired.
Right.
And but a lot of times when I'm at the studio, I get ideas from different people. Like this friend at the studio at Christmas, she was making flasks to give to her family for Christmas. And I was watching her and they were so pretty. And so I decided, I said, Michelle, I'm going to steal your idea and I'm going to make flasks. Do you care? She said, no. Well, of course, mine looks nothing like hers.
Right.
It's got a skull and a crossbone on it and all that kind of stuff. But, and I made 2 of them for my sons for Christmas. But, you know, I just don't know where it comes from. It just is a part of me that's been knocking on my heart for a long time to do something for me. And I make things, they're silly and they're not normal looking, but then I'm silly and not normal looking. So most of us are.
Well, you know, I think you're touching upon something again that you know, if people listen to this show on a regular basis, I'm always saying this, but I think all these years I keep thinking I'm going to decide that this is a stupid observation, but I think it stands. That I think I see a lot of adult artists trying to do in their work, they're trying to get back in touch with their childhood sensibility. That time when you're a kid and you're creative and it's all very pure expression, and because we see it in the classwork of our youngest students, because they haven't learned all those things. They haven't learned all those filters and those categorizations and the sort of ways to do. They haven't become adults. And then I think a lot of times adults who are artists are trying to get back in touch with that part of their life experience. I mean, it seems like it's there in your work, and it doesn't have to be, because your work, I think what you're talking about a little bit too is, you know, that your work is maybe akin to folk art, which is sometimes thought of as sort of, it's not somebody who studied and you know, all this sophisticated work, but it's a pure sort of form of expression, a more direct sort of form of expression that occurs. So there's, you know, you're right to be proud of all those things, in my opinion. Bob, let's come back to you for a second. Now you've made, I know you want to focus on these other people, and I applaud you for your desire to want to do that. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. You and I have known each other for a while, and you've made a couple references to it, and we don't want to get into all of it. But you had a stroke last year. You've recovered very well. You talked before we were recording about your therapies and stuff like that, and you seem to be fit as a fiddle. But what I'm really interested in asking you about that that I've heard you say to me is that what was it like to draw again? What was it like when you started drawing again? Was it the same? Has anything about the drawings different? Will we look at these and see something that we haven't seen in your work before? What's the act of drawing been like after this experience?
One of my favorite things to start off all my classes, no matter where I taught, was, and especially to adult people, students, was Picasso said something that I feel gave us all the rights that we wanted. He said that all of the pieces that I do are one towards the possibility that one will be decent. And possibility and decent seem to give me everything I need. Now, going back to your question, am I doing anything different? I hope so. I hope so. Is there an identifiable Lockhart? Yes, I'm sure there is. But the drawings are more layered than they were before. They're more simplified than they were before. They're more basic than they were before. And yet you'll see the same busy, incredibly chaotic composition. That is ruled by one thing in my mind, and that is that my least favorite class at the Art Institute was color theory. And I remember saying with great force to this teacher, I don't need this stuff. I'm going to be an artist. And it has come back to bite me in the butt often, thank God. So the pieces I do are a series of questions. I don't know what the questions are. I couldn't formulate them, but they are questions about when this layer is done, is this balance of color okay? Is this balance of shape okay? Is this balance of form okay? And by okay, I mean, is it acceptable as something the best I could do at the moment? And the way I work, I think there's 22 drawings in this show. It means there were probably 25, 26, 27 pieces that I finished and signed and then threw away because they weren't the best I could do at the moment. And I feel a real responsibility to the person that spends money to buy one of these things, so that it is the best I can do at the moment. I think I'm far more disciplined than I've ever been in my life, even with the sculpture, because, well, I don't know how many more drawings I am able to do. I think when my need to do drawings is over, I'm over. I just can't imagine my life without my art. And I say that with the full knowledge that my goal was to be Brancusi or Henry Moore or somebody, Paul Klee. But when I was in my 50s, I realized the limitations of my talents were limitations to me, but they were also advantages that I could take advantage of doing what I do to the best of my ability.
Well, and you mentioned before we started the interview, you talk about how so when you pick up the pencil, when you start to draw, that it steadied you.
Yes, during the stroke, I was unable to speak. I still don't do real well, but I was unable to speak, and I had to have a speech therapist to teach me that. And I was unable to walk, but my hands had a real tremendous tremor to them, a real serious tremor, except when I went to draw. So in the hospital, my son said, "Here, try and draw." And apparently it was during one of the strokes, so I couldn't do it, and I was discouraged. When I took up my palette, when I went off to Texas for a month to recuperate, the tremors stopped when I picked up my pencil. They were gone. I think that was a miracle. That's the best I can do with describing why that was. When I put the pencil down, I went back to that tremor, but there was such a deep need to do this that I don't know what else to call it. Yeah.
It's all very interesting, again, to think about when we talk about our people's relationships to what they're doing, and Lynn's relationship to clay, and your relationship to drawing, that these aren't just, I always imagine that these conversations are, I would hope that people who are lay people that really don't know much about the artist experience would listen to them, because I think these are always fascinating conversations to learn about artistic practice. But to see that, drawing art can be seen as therapy for anybody who goes through something, but for you, it was maybe the key therapy was
Mhm,
to get
mhm.
that pencil back in your hand.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
Cedric, I don't want to be ignoring you here. Um, so we were talking. So all this talk about relationship to medium. Um, Let me ask you that question. Why are you a photographer instead of something else? How did you come to pick up the camera? Why were you drawn to that medium?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and there is a connection with what Lynn said about her job. As you said, I studied architecture and photography, and I worked as an architect for the last 20 years, and I stopped last year actually. And so for 20 years, let's say I had a creative job in architecture, but also clients, and also, you know, deal with administration and contractors and delay and cost. And photography was, for me, a getaway to make a creative process for myself. So I've always worked for personal series. And then when I was satisfied of a body of work, I was trying to find an art gallery to show it. And I was lucky enough to have a good gallery in Belgium and then in the Netherlands. So I guess the big key is the freedom. And so why the photography instead of something else? Well, probably because I'm not talented in anything else, and I'm doing my best in photography. And it's what Bob said about doing your best at a certain moment speaks to me about my trials in writing. So I think I spend my entire time to write, but only a few years ago I've decided that something was decent enough to be published, and those are the texts with the in my first book. It's a photography book with writings, and you mentioned that children's are the one not having any limitation, and so as an artist you try to go back on that period of age. And the book I made is about Terre de Chien, so it's World of Dogs. So there are dogs that I met for 15 years traveling the world. And my point is, let's give a voice to those dogs and to express their own thoughts. So I'm a dogs lover, and I truly believe they have their own personality. And so meeting those dogs, mostly straight dogs in South America, in Africa, in the States too, I wanted to create very short stories about their life. And because each dog is different, and because you don't have any limitation, because you're not an adult writing, you're a dog, then you feel totally free as a child, I guess. And as Lynn mentioned about having 5 legs on a cat, or hands and no arms, it was the same for me. So again, a very joyful process. In addition of taking the picture, writing the stories. And so that process took me, about the writing, it took me 1 year, 18 months. And so it was a great joy.
I have a question. So this is a question I've always wondered about this, and I don't know that I've ever had the opportunity to ask it. So do you find that there's any difference in dogs in different parts of the world? Any kind of, or is that a universal behavior for dogs?
Well, it's very interesting because I think dogs are pretty the same, but the relationship between humans and dogs are very different, where they are always considered like pets, or they are more animals, I guess, working animals sometimes. You keep your dog at home or in the backyard or in a cage or not, etc. I think that relation is very depending the region of the world. And all the dogs I met in South America stray dogs I met there, they were not aggressive, but they could seem impressive in terms of they do follow me sometimes for an entire day. I guess waiting for me to give some food or some attention. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice. And
Well,
and if I may add, the starting point of that is quite funny. 20 years ago, I used to live in Italy, and my neighbor was a very old man. And that guy used to walk his dog every day, but speak aloud in the street every time, all the time. And I was just thinking, man, what about that poor dog? I don't know if it was a poor dog, but experiencing this probably for a decade. And so I thought, that dog, is he mad about this, annoyed, compassionate, already crazy? And that was the starting point. Exploring and being curious about what those dogs have for a life or like those.
well, I was just curious, is the book available in the States?
Yeah, I was kind of smart enough to translate it, so it's translated by an English author. So the book is in French and in English, and the book will be available, and signed copies will be available in the show, and
cool.
in addition of my website.
Yeah, well, that's
asking.
I mean, it's because I'm a dog lover, and so I'm fascinated by these stories, and anybody that thinks it's silly to talk about animals this way I'm probably not going to get along with them. So Bob, what's next for you? What do you think? I mean, you're just going to keep drawing. Obviously, you're not going to stop doing work, but is there anything coming up, or are you just going to keep trucking along in the studio?
Well, both. I've got some big shows coming up, one in Jasper, Indiana, and I have just curated a wonderful show that opens in May at the Owensboro Museum, and I was fortunate enough to select, it turned out to be 52 artists. I had recommended 73, 52 artists that were under the heading of Connection Louisville. And so I didn't get everybody that I should have probably, but I did my best. And so that show should be an outstanding show. Ed Hamilton and Rodney Hatfield and Jackie Parsley and well, I hope everybody.
I know Lynn Bias is in that show, and
yeah,
my coworker Kayla Bischoff, I believe, is in that show.
Yes, yeah. So it should be a pretty inclusive, but again, you do the best you can. I don't remember everybody that I should get, but I did the best I could. So that's coming up, and I'm very proud of that.
Is that part of your character statement? These are people I can remember after the stroke.
That's it. That's happened at St. John's. I had everybody memorized at the homeless shelter, and now I can look at some of them what I know really well and say, I don't know your name. So it's just, but it could be worse.
Well, it's what it is. But it's great to see you back in action, and
yeah.
And you sound kind of scrappy and sardonic like you always did. So you're
yes. And so I guess one more thing I want to explain, because people don't know this in general. The titles for my drawings are statements that I write in a book that's separate from anything I do. And as I come up with the next drawing, I assign a statement that I used to think were great jokes at Bellarmine, and they would go, yeah, right, So the statements have nothing to do with the drawings at all. So for instance, 3 guys driving a Buick with a chipmunk does not mean that there's any of those things in it, but it's comfortable for people to say, I see the chipmunk. And that allows me then to engage them in a way, because I'm very shy in that case. I'm not shy teaching, but I'm shy with drawing. So it gives them a way to engage with the drawings. I hope that is not threatening to them. So that's all I need to say.
I think that's enough. Well, I think I think we'll wrap it up now. Again, thank all of you for taking the time to talk with me today. I'll just say it again. So the show's called Friends, and it's Bob Lockhart, longtime Pyro member, and he has invited Lynn Duke, Cedric Ballarati, and Amber Thieneman to show with him. It will open on April 1st and run through May 1st. There's a reception Sunday, April 3rd, 1 to 4 p.m. So if you found any of this interesting, that's your opportunity to maybe come meet them and Amber and other people. Pyro Gallery is at 1006 East Washington Street. Really cool space. I don't mean to sound like a commercial, but I'm going to say it's almost right next door to the 1020 Brewery, because I found in Louisville, if you want to give people directions, you tell them the closest brewery, and they seem to know where you're talking about. So Bob, Lynn, Cedric, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having us.